refuge amongst the Habail with whom they still mostly live. 5960. The Majeerteen Sultanate, Mijitaniya, was another prominent Somali sultanate based in the Horn region. Ruled by King Osman Mahamuad during its golden age, it controlled much of northeastern and central Somalia in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The polity had all of the organs of an integrated modern state and maintained a robust trading network. It also entered into treaties with foreign powers and exerted strong centralized authority on the domestic front. 6162. Much of the Sultanate's former domain is today coextensive with the autonomous Puntland region in northern Somalia. 63. The Sultanate of Hobyo was a 19th century Somali kingdom founded by Sultan Yusuf Ali Kenadide. Initially, Kenadide's goal was to seize control of the neighboring Majeerteen Sultanate, which was then ruled by his cousin Bokar Osman Mahamuad. However, he was unsuccessful in this endeavor, and was eventually forced into exile in Yemen. A decade later, in the 1870s, Kenadide returned from the Arabian Peninsula with a band of Hadrami musketeers and a group of devoted lieutenants. With their assistance, he managed to establish the Kingdom of Hobyo, which would rule much of northern and central Somalia during the early modern period. 64. Modern history. Map of Africa in 1909. The Horn region is the easternmost projection of African continent. The Dervish state in 1900 after takeover of the area or Fugigane, the period following the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. When European powers scrambled for territory in Africa and tried to establish coaling stations for their ships, Italy invaded and occupied Eritrea. On 1 January 1890, Eritrea officially became a colony of Italy. In 1896, further Italian incursion into the Horn was decisively halted by Ethiopian forces. By 1936, however, Eritrea became a province of Italian East Africa, Africa Orientale Italiana, along with Ethiopia and Italian Somaliland. By 1941, Eritrea had about 760,000 inhabitants, including 70,000 Italians. 65. The Commonwealth Armed Forces, along with the Ethiopian Patriotic Resistance, expelled those of Italy in 1941, 66, and took over the area's administration. The British continued to administer the territory under UN mandate until 1951, when Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia, per UN Resolution 390 v. adopted December 1950. The strategic importance of Eritrea, due to its Red Sea coastline and mineral resources, was the main cause for the federation with Ethiopia, which in turn led to Eritrea's annexation as Ethiopia's 14th province in 1962. This was the culmination of a gradual process of takeover by the Ethiopian authorities, a process which included a 1959 edict establishing compulsory teaching of Amharic, the main language of Ethiopia, in all Eritrean schools. The lack of regard for the Eritrean population led to the formation of an independence movement in the early 1960s, 1961, which erupted into a 30-year war against successive Ethiopian governments that ended in 1991. Following a UN-supervised referendum in Eritrea, dubbed UNOVER, in which the Eritrean people overwhelmingly voted for independence, Eritrea declared its independence and gained international recognition in 1993. 67. In 1998, a border dispute with Ethiopia led to the Eritrean-Ethiopian War. 68. From 1862 until 1894, the land to the north of the Gulf of Tadjoura, situated in modern-day Djibouti, was called Abuk and was ruled by Somali and Afar sultans, local authorities with whom France signed various treaties between 1883 and 1887 to first gain a foothold in their region. 69, 70, 71. In 1894, Léonce Lagarde established a permanent French administration in the city of Djibouti and named the region Côte Française des Somalis, French Somaliland, a name which continued until 1967. Eritrean Askaris, colonial troops of the Italian army, INA 1898 wood engraving Porta di Giordani, Gate Gardens, at Mogadishu Market, Italian Somaliland. British camel troopers in British Somaliland. Somali engineers repair a captured Ethiopian T-34/85 model 1969 tank for use with Western Somali Liberation Front during the Ogaden War, March 1978. In 1958, on the eve of neighboring Somalia's independence in 1960, a referendum was held in the territory to decide whether to join the Somali Republic or to remain with France. The referendum favored continued association with France, partly due to a combined yes vote by the sizable Afar ethnic group and resident Europeans. 72. There was also reports of widespread vote rigging, with the French expelling thousands of Somals before the polls. 73. The majority of those who voted no were Somalis, however strongly in favor of joining a united Somalia, as had been proposed by Mahmoud Harbi, vice president of the Government Council. Harbi was killed in a plane crash 2 years later. 72. Djibouti finally gained its independence from France in 1977. Hassan Gould Abdon, a Somali politician who had campaigned for a yes vote in the referendum of 1958, became the nation's first president, 1977-1999. 72. In early 2011, the Djiboutian citizenry took part in a series of protests against the long-serving government, which were associated with the larger Arab Spring demonstrations. The unrest eventually subsided by April of the year, and Djibouti's ruling People's Rally for Progress Party was re-elected to office. The dervish existed for 25 years, from 1895 until 1920. The Turks named Hassan Emir of the Somali nation, 74, and the Germans promised to officially recognize any territories the dervishes were to acquire. 75. After a quarter of a century of holding the British at bay, the dervishes were finally defeated in 1920 as a direct consequence of Britain's new policy of aerial bombardment. 76. As a result of this bombardment, former dervish territories were turned into a protectorate of Britain. Italy faced similar opposition from Somali sultans and armies, and did not acquire full control of modern Somalia until the fascist era in late 1927. This occupation lasted until 1941, and was replaced by a British military administration. Former British Somaliland would remain, alongside with Italian Somaliland, a trusteeship of Italy, between 1950 and 1960. The union of the two countries in 1960 formed the Somali Republic. A civilian government was formed, and on the 20th of July 1961, through a popular referendum, the constitution drafted in 1960 was ratified. 77. Due to its long-standing ties with the Arab world, the Somali Republic was accepted in 1974 as a member of the Arab League. 78. During the same year, the nation's former socialist administration also chaired the Organization of African Unity, the predecessor of the African Union. 79. In 1991, the Somali Civil War broke out, which saw the dissolving of the Union and Somaliland regaining its independence, along with the collapse of the central government and the emergence of numerous autonomous polities, including the Puntland administration in the north. 80. In the northwest, Somalia's inhabitants subsequently reverted to local forms of conflict resolution, either secular, Islamic or customary law, with a provision for appeal of all sentences. A transitional federal government was subsequently created in 2004. 81. The federal government of Somalia was established on the 20th of August, 2012, concurrent with the end of the TFG's interim mandate. 82. It represents the first permanent central government in the country since the start of the civil war. 82. The Federal Parliament of Somalia serves as the government's legislative branch. 83. United Nations soldiers. Part of the United Nations mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea, monitoring Eritrea-Ethiopia boundary, 2005. Modern Ethiopia and its current borders are a result of significant territorial reduction in the north and expansion in the east and south toward its present borders, owing to several migrations, commercial integration treaties as well as conquests, particularly by Emperor Menelik II and Razgobna. 84. From the central province of Sho, Menelik set off to subjugate and incorporate the lands and people of the south, east and west into an empire. 84. 85. He did this with the help of Razgobna's Shu and Oromo militia, began expanding his kingdom to the south and east, expanding into areas that had not been held since the invasion of Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, and other areas that had never been under his rule, resulting in the borders of Ethiopia of today. 86. Menelik had signed the Treaty of Wishal with Italy in May 1889, in which Italy would recognize Ethiopia's sovereignty so long as Italy could control a small area of northern Tigray, part of modern Eritrea. 87. In return, Italy was to provide Menelik with arms and support him as emperor. 88. The Italians seized the time between the signing of the treaty and its ratification by the Italian government to further expand their territorial claims. Italy began a state-funded program of settlement for landless Italians in Eritrea, which increased tensions between the Eritrean peasants and the Italians. 88. This conflict erupted in the Battle of Adwa on the 1st of March 1896, in which Italy's colonial forces were defeated by the Ethiopians. 89. The early 20th century in Ethiopia was marked by the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie I, who came to power after Iyasuvi was deposed. In 1935, Haile Selassie's troops fought and lost the Second Italo-Abyssinian War, after which Italy annexed Ethiopia to Italian East Africa. 90. Haile Selassie subsequently appealed to the League of Nations, delivering an address that made him a worldwide figure and 1935's Time magazine Man of the Year. 91. Following the entry of Italy into World War II, British Empire forces together with patriot Ethiopian fighters, liberated Ethiopia during the East African Campaign in 1941. 92. Haile Selassie's reign came to an end in 1974, when a Soviet-backed Marxist-Leninist military junta, the DERG led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, deposed him, and established a one-party communist state, which was called the People's Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. In July 1977, the Ogaden War broke out after the Somalia government of Siad Barre sought to incorporate the predominantly Somali-inhabited Ogaden region into a pan-Somali Greater Somalia. By September 1977, the Somali army controlled 90% of the Ogaden, but was later forced to withdraw after Ethiopia's DERG received assistance from the USSR, Cuba, South Yemen, East Germany, 93, and North Korea, including around 15,000 Cuban combat troops. In 1989, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, TPLF, merged with other ethnically based opposition movements to form the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, and eventually managed to overthrow Mengistu's dictatorial regime in 1991. A transitional government, composed of an 87-member Council of Representatives and guided by a national charter that functioned as a transitional constitution, was then set up. The first free and democratic election took place later in 1995, when Ethiopia's longest-serving Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was elected to office. As with other nations in the Horn region, Ethiopia maintained its historically close relations with countries in the Middle East during this period of change. 94. Zenawi died in 2012, but his Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, party remains the ruling political coalition in Ethiopia. Geography, geology and climate. The Horn of Africa as seen from the NASA Space Shuttle in May 1993. The orange and tan colors in this image indicate a largely arid to semi-arid climate. The Horn of Africa is almost equidistant from the equator and the Tropic of Cancer. It consists chiefly of mountains uplifted through the formation of the Great Rift Valley, a fissure in the Earth's crust extending from Turkey to Mozambique and marking the separation of the African and Arabian tectonic plates. Mostly mountainous, their origin arose through faults resulting from the Rift Valley. Geologically, the Horn and Yemen once formed a single land mass around 18 million years ago, before the Gulf of Aden rifted and separated the Horn region from the Arabian Peninsula. 95-96. The Somali Plate is bounded on the west by the East African Rift, which stretches south from the Triple Junction in the Afar Depression, and an undersea continuation of the rift extending southward offshore. The northern boundary is the Aden Ridge along the coast of Saudi Arabia. The eastern boundary is the Central Indian Ridge, the northern portion of which is also known as the Carlsberg Ridge. The southern boundary is the Southwest Indian Ridge. Extensive glaciers once covered the Simien and Bale Mountains but melted at the beginning of the Holocene. The mountains descend in a huge escarpment to the Red Sea and more steadily to the Indian Ocean. Socotra is a small island in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Somalia. Its size is 3,600 km to 1,400 square mi, and it is a territory of Yemen. The lowlands of the Horn are generally arid in spite of their proximity to the equator. This is because few winds of the tropical monsoons that give seasonal rains to the Sahel and the Sudan blow from the west. Consequently, they lose their moisture before reaching Djibouti and northern part of Somalia, with the result that most of the Horn receives little rainfall during the monsoon season. The Horn of Africa. NASA image in the mountains of Ethiopia. Many areas receive over 2,000 mm, 79 in, per year, and even Asmara receives an average of 570 mm, 22 in. This rainfall is the sole source of water for many areas outside Ethiopia, including Egypt. In the winter, the northeasterly trade winds do not provide any moisture except in mountainous areas of northern Somalia, where rainfall in late autumn can produce annual totals as high as 500 mm, 20 in. On the eastern coast, a strong upwelling and the fact that the winds blow parallel to the coast means annual rainfall can be as low as 50 mm, 2.0 in. The climate in Ethiopia varies considerably between regions. It is generally hotter in the lowlands and temperate on the plateau. At Addis Ababa, which ranges from 2,200 to 2,600 m, 7,218 to 8,530 foot, maximum temperature is 26 degrees Celsius, 78.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and minimum 4 degrees C, 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit.
I need a break. I'm close to falling asleep. So I need a break.